The young executive was dismissed and ends a $700 million deal without warning. Michael Parker adjusted his tie for the 10th time before entering the conference room at Thompson and Associates, carrying the project that had consumed his last 3 months. His revolutionary proposal could transform not just his career but the entire community of Hope Village in Chicago. That's when he saw the mocking smirks of the directors as they spotted him. Richard Thompson, the CEO, didn't even look up from his papers as Michael approached the glass table. The other executives exchanged superior glances, as if they already knew this moment would be just a formality. "So, kid, here to present us with another one of your impossible dreams," Richard said with a sarcastic smile, extending his hand half-heartedly. Michael felt his blood boil, but kept his composure. At 28, he knew his youthful appearance and always neat hair made many dismiss his work. But this time would be different. He was sure of it. "Mr. Thompson, the project I've brought today could generate over $700 million in profit for the company, in addition to directly benefiting more than 5,000 families in Hope Village," Michael began, trying to keep his voice steady. The silence that followed was broken by a loud laugh from Jennifer Wilson, the CFO. She adjusted her glasses and looked at Michael as if he were a child suggesting they build castles in the air. "Michael, sweetheart, do you really think we'll waste our time on social projects? Our company focuses on results, not charity," Jennifer said, prompting laughter from the others. "It's not charity, Ms. Wilson. It's an affordable housing project integrated with local commerce that would guarantee returns within 5 years," Michael insisted, opening his folder with the charts and projections he had meticulously prepared. Richard finally looked up, but only to wave his hand impatiently. He snatched the folder from Michael's hands and, without even opening it, tore the documents in half, tossing the pieces onto the conference room floor. "Enough wasting time on this nonsense. Michael, you're here to learn how the real world works, not to change it with your youthful ideas," Richard said, rising from his chair. The sound of tearing paper echoed in Michael's mind like a slap to the face. He looked around the room and saw only indifferent expressions, some even amused by his humiliation. The secretary, who had entered to serve coffee, averted her eyes, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Thompson, if you'd just let me explain the numbers..." Michael tried again, his voice now trembling slightly. "No, you will sit in that chair and watch how real men do business. David, bring the documents for the Worldwide Ventures deal," Richard ordered, pointing to a chair in the corner. Michael felt tears burning his eyes, but forced himself not to cry in front of everyone. He walked to the designated chair, picking up the torn pieces of his project from the floor. Each shredded fragment seemed to carry a piece of his shattered dreams. For the next 2 hours, Michael watched in silence as the executives discussed the biggest deal in the company's history. Worldwide Ventures was proposing the construction of a massive commercial complex right in the heart of Hope Village, the exact location where Michael had planned his affordable housing project. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing, David Miller, the head of projects, spread blueprints and documents across the table as he explained the details of the venture. Michael immediately realized something was very wrong. The numbers didn't add up, and there were clauses in the contracts that seemed deliberately obscure. "Worldwide Ventures is offering $700 million up front, on the condition that we start construction in 60 days, explained David with an enthusiasm Michael hadn't seen in the company for months. "And what about the current residents in the area?" asked Jennifer, flipping through the documents. "That's their problem. We have the legal backing needed for the evictions. Some protests are expected, but nothing we can't handle," Richard replied coldly. Michael felt his stomach turn. He knew Hope Village well. His own grandmother, Grace, had lived there for over 40 years before passing away the year before. It was a humble neighborhood, full of history and hard-working families, struggling to keep their small businesses afloat. The meeting ended with all the executives euphoric, planning how they'd spend the million-dollar bonuses they'd receive from closing the deal. Michael remained seated, pretending to organize some papers while processing everything he'd heard. By the time he left the office, it was already night. The streets of Chicago were bustling with rush-hour traffic, but Michael walked slowly, lost in thought. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the apartment he shared with his mother, Susan, in Lincoln Park. "How did the presentation go, son?" Susan asked as soon as he stepped into their small apartment. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through bills and medications. Michael looked at his mother's tired face, marked by years of hard work as a nurse in a public hospital. After his father's sudden passing from a heart attack at 52, Susan had sacrificed everything to ensure Michael got a good education and could pursue his dreams. "It wasn't what we hoped for, Mum," Michael said, sitting beside her. "They didn't even want to hear the proposal." Susan took her son's hand in hers, calloused from years of caring for patients. Her warm brown eyes, always kind, showed the concern of a mother who knew Michael's sensitivity well. "You know what your father always said, that a person's worth isn't measured by how much money they can pile up, but by the good they can do for others," Susan said, gently stroking his face. "But Mom, it feels like those things don't matter in the real world. Today I heard men talking about evicting entire families from their homes, as if they were just numbers on a spreadsheet," Michael confessed. "And do you agree with that?" Susan asked, already knowing the answer. Michael shook his head. His mother smiled, the same smile that had always soothed his worries since childhood. "Then you already know what you have to do. Your father used to say that when your heart beats out of rhythm, it's because you're on the wrong path," Susan said, standing up to start dinner. That night, Michael barely slept. He tossed and turned, thinking about the residents of Hope Village who would be displaced, the arrogance of the executives, the sheer injustice of it all. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of his father, who appeared smiling and saying something he couldn't quite make out. The next morning, he woke with a determination he hadn't felt in months. He decided he would dig deeper into the details of the deal with Worldwide Ventures. If something was wrong, and his gut told him there was, he needed to find out what it was. At the office, Michael arrived earlier than usual. Using his login credentials, he reviewed all the documents related to the project. What he discovered in the next 2 hours left him stunned. Worldwide Ventures wasn't exactly what it seemed. Behind the facade of a reputable foreign company was a web of shell corporations registered in tax havens. Even worse, some clauses in the contract allowed the company to simply abandon the project after receiving the tax incentives, leaving the construction firm Thompson and Associates with massive debts. But what shocked Michael the most was discovering that Richard Thompson knew everything. There were emails where he discussed with lawyers how to structure the deal so the responsibility would fall on the local small suppliers if anything went wrong. Michael discreetly printed the most important documents and tucked them into his briefcase. His heart raced as he thought about what to do with that information. If he exposed the scheme, he'd likely lose his job and be targeted by Richard Thompson. But if he stayed silent, hundreds of families would lose their homes and dozens of small business owners would go bankrupt. "Michael, in my office now!" Richard shouted from across the room. With shaky legs, Michael walked to the CEO's office. Richard stood behind his mahogany desk, his face twisted in anger. "I assume you spent your night thinking about your behavior yesterday. I hope you've grown up and understood how things work here," Richard said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. "Mr. Thompson, actually, I'd like to talk about the Hope Village project," Michael began, trying to keep his voice steady. "What project?" "That garbage you brought up yesterday." "Forget it, Michael. We have far more important things to focus on right now," Richard interrupted. "Sir, I reviewed the documents for the deal with Worldwide Ventures and found some irregularities," Michael said, feeling sweat trickle down his forehead. A tense silence followed. Richard slowly sank into his chair, his eyes locked on Michael like a predator watching its prey. "What kind of irregularities?" Richard asked, his voice low and dangerous. Michael took a deep breath. It was now or never. Worldwide Ventures' financial guarantees are fake. The company doesn't have enough capital to fulfill the contract. Plus, there are clauses that transfer all the risk to our local suppliers. "Are you accusing me of not doing my job properly?" Richard asked, standing up again. "No, sir. I'm saying maybe we should review the terms more carefully before signing," Michael replied, trying to stay diplomatic. Richard let out a cold laugh. "Michael, Do you really think you got here by accident? You think I built this empire by being too cautious? Sometimes to win big, you have to risk big. But sir, these aren't just financial risks. There are families involved. Families? Richard cut in with disdain. Michael, you need to understand one thing. In the business world, there's no room for sentimentality. If you can't make tough decisions, maybe this profession isn't for you. Michael felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He looked at Richard and saw a man who had completely lost the ability to see the people behind the numbers. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to propose an alternative. My original project could be adapted to work alongside Worldwide's development, benefiting both the company and the community. Michael tried one last time. Richard stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on Michael's shoulder. Listen carefully, kid. You're going to drop these fantasies right now. Tomorrow, we have the final meeting to sign the contract. You'll be there, you'll stay quiet, and you'll learn how real men do business. That, or you can look for another job. Michael left the office on unsteady legs. He knew he had 24 hours to make a decision that would change his life forever. He spent the rest of the day trying to work normally, but his mind was elsewhere. That night at home, Michael told his mother everything. Susan listened in silence, occasionally shaking her head with concern. "Son, you know what the right thing to do is," she said when Michael finished speaking. "But Mum, if I report this scheme, I'll lose my job. And you know we need my salary for your medical appointments and medicine," Michael said, the anguish clear in his voice. Susan stood up and walked to the small altar in the living room where she kept a photo of her late husband. She picked up the photo and returned to Michael. "Do you remember what happened to your father?" she asked, showing him the picture. "Of course, Mom. He had a heart attack at work." "That wasn't all, son. Your father found out the company he worked for was embezzling money from the employees' pensions. He tried to report it, was fired and harassed. The stress of seeing other families harmed and not being able to do anything about it, that's what really killed him," Susan revealed, tears streaming down her face. Michael was stunned. He had never known the true details of his father's final months. "He made me promise to tell you this when you were mature enough to understand. Your father said he'd rather die poor and honest than live rich, knowing others were suffering because of his silence," Susan continued. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Michael asked, emotional. "Because I wanted you to come to this conclusion on your own. And you have, son. Your heart is telling you exactly what to do," Susan said, hugging him. Michael spent the night organizing all the documents he had gathered. Beyond the financial irregularities, he discovered that Worldwide Ventures had a history of abandoned projects in other countries, always using the same method, securing massive tax incentives and then declaring bankruptcy for the subsidiary companies. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Michael arrived at the office determined. The final meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and he knew he'd only have one chance to do the right thing. At 1:30 p.m., Michael was in the conference room as the executives from Worldwide Ventures began arriving. There were 3 men in dark suits, serious expressions on their faces, carrying leather briefcases. The delegation leader, a short, bald man who introduced himself as Vincent Caruso, greeted Richard with a firm handshake. "Mr. Thompson, it's a pleasure to finalize this deal, which will be so beneficial for both parties," Vincent said with a slight Italian accent. Richard was beaming, clearly eager to sign the $700 million contract. Jennifer and David were also present, along with 2 company lawyers and a notary public who would certify the signatures. "Michael, sit over there and watch how real business is done," Richard said, pointing to the same corner chair where Michael had been humiliated the day before. Michael obeyed, but this time he didn't feel like a scared boy. He carried a folder with all the documents he had gathered, along with a recording he'd made of his conversation with Richard the previous day using his phone app. The meeting began with Vincent presenting the final details of the project. The commercial complex would occupy the entire area of Hope Village, including the demolition of over 200 homes and 50 small businesses. In return, Thompson and Associates would receive $700 million, $400 million up front, and the rest in annual installments. The families currently living in the area will be relocated to housing projects on the outskirts, obviously with proper compensation, explained Vincent, as if he were talking about moving chess pieces. And what about the local small business owners? Asked Jennifer. They'll have priority to rent spaces in the new commercial complex, obviously paying market rates, replied Vincent with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Michael knew this was a lie. The rent prices in the new complex would be at least 10 times higher than what small business owners could afford. It was an elegant way to push them out without taking direct responsibility. Perfect. Let's move on to the documents then, said Richard, rubbing his hands anxiously. That's when Michael stood up from his chair. Mr. Thompson, may I ask a question before signing? Said Michael, his voice firm and clear. Richard looked at him with irritation. Michael, this isn't the time for your youthful doubts. Sit down. Actually, I think everyone here would like to know about Worldwide Ventures' track record in other countries, continued Michael, ignoring Richard's order. Vincent Caruso raised an eyebrow, clearly interested in where this was going. What are you talking about, Michael? Asked David, confused. Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Worldwide Ventures abandoned similar projects in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In every case, after receiving tax incentives, their subsidiary companies declared bankruptcy, leaving local partners with millions in debt. The room fell completely silent. Vincent no longer looked friendly, and Richard was turning red with anger. Michael, you're being ridiculous. These are outrageous accusations, shouted Richard. They're not accusations, Mr. Thompson. They're documented facts. I have the company records from all 3 countries, the bankruptcy meeting minutes and the lawsuits filed by local partners, said Michael, spreading the papers across the table. Vincent stood up abruptly. Mr. Thompson, we didn't come here to be insulted by an ill-mannered employee. Perhaps we should postpone this meeting. No, Michael, you're fired. Get out of my company right now, bellowed Richard, pointing at the door. Before I go, I think everyone should know that the financial guarantee provided by Worldwide Ventures is fake, said Michael, pulling another document from his briefcase. This bank account in the Cayman Islands doesn't exist. The SWIFT code belongs to a branch that closed 3 years ago. Jennifer took the document and checked the numbers on her tablet. After a few minutes, she looked at Richard with panic in her eyes. Richard, he's right. This financial guarantee is fake, said Jennifer, her voice trembling. Vincent was already packing his documents into his briefcase. Gentlemen, there's clearly been a misunderstanding here. We prefer to end negotiations at this point. Wait, we can fix this, said Richard, desperate as he watched the $700 million slipping through his fingers. Actually, gentlemen, I recorded my conversation with Mr. Thompson yesterday, where he admitted knowing the risks of the deal and his intention to shift all responsibility onto local suppliers, said Michael, pulling his phone from his pocket. Richard turned pale. You can't have recorded our conversation. That's an invasion of privacy. In the United States, it's legal to record conversations you're part of, as long as it's for self-protection or reporting crimes, Michael replied calmly. The Worldwide Ventures executives were already heading for the door when one turned back to Richard. Mr. Thompson, this deal is clearly no longer viable. Our lawyers will be in touch, he said, before leaving the room. Michael was left alone with Richard, Jennifer, and David. The silence was tense, broken only by the sound of Richard's heavy breathing. You destroyed everything. You ruined years of work, shouted Richard, stepping toward Michael. No, Mr. Thompson. I prevented hundreds of families from being harmed and stopped our company from going bankrupt in 2 years, Michael replied calmly. Our company? You're no longer part of this company. You're fired. And I'll make sure you never work in construction in Chicago again, Richard threatened. Michael picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. Mr. Thompson, I expected this. That's exactly why I sent copies of all these documents to the District Attorney's Office, the Internal Revenue Service, and 3 journalists who specialize in corporate investigations. Richard turned pale. You didn't. I did. And I also sent them to the international parent company that funds some of Thompson and Associates projects. I imagine they'll be very interested to learn how their money was being used, Michael said before leaving the room. Michael walked out of the company building for the last time, but he didn't feel defeated. On the contrary, he felt a relief he hadn't known in months. He had done the right thing, even though he knew it would cost him dearly. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate. Journalists published detailed reports about the scheme that had been stopped. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into Thompson and Associates and Worldwide Ventures. The Internal Revenue Service launched a full audit of both companies. Michael, as expected, was left unemployed. But he also began receiving calls from residents of Hope Village, thanking him for preventing their forced evictions. Mrs. Robinson, a 70-year-old woman who had been born in the neighborhood, insisted on visiting him in person. "My dear, I don't know how to thank you. My home may not be worth much money, but it's where I was born, where I raised my children, and where I want to spend my final days," Mrs. Robinson said, holding Michael's hands with tears in her eyes. It was these visits and calls that gave Michael the strength to keep going. Even unemployed and struggling financially, he knew he had made the right decision. 3 weeks after the scandal, Michael received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was Catherine Reynolds, an urban architect who worked on sustainable housing projects. "Michael, my name is Catherine. I read about what you did and I'd like to talk to you about a proposal," she said. They met at a cafe in Wicker Park. Catherine was a woman around 45, with graying hair and sharp eyes that conveyed seriousness and determination. "Michael, I've worked for 20 years on affordable housing and sustainable urban development projects. What you did was brave, but more than that, it was smart. I read your original proposal for Hope Village and I was impressed," Catherine said. "Thank you, but unfortunately, that project died with my job," Michael replied, still disheartened. "Actually, I'd like to propose a partnership. I have a group of investors interested in projects that combine financial returns with positive social impact. They want to hear your proposal," Catherine explained. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. After weeks of unemployment and uncertainty, a new opportunity had arisen. "But I don't have the original documents anymore. Richard Thompson tore them all up," Michael said. Catherine smiled. "I'm sure you remember every detail. Besides, we now have something we didn't before: credibility. Your name is associated with honesty and standing up for social justice. That means a lot in today's market." In the following days, Michael worked tirelessly to rebuild his project. This time, however, he had a different perspective. It wasn't just about building houses, but about creating a sustainable community that respected the history and traditions of Hope Village. The revised project included the construction of affordable housing, integrated with commercial spaces for the residents themselves. There would be a central square, a children's play area, a community garden, and even a vocational school focused on job training. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Catherine presented the project to her group of investors, made up of business people who believed in sustainable development. Among them was Benjamin Goldman, a 55-year-old entrepreneur who had made his fortune in the tech sector and now invested in projects with social impact. "Michael, your project is exactly what we've been looking for. We don't just want profit, we want to create a model that can be replicated in other communities," Benjamin said during the presentation. "Mr. Goldman, I have to admit I'm still surprised by all this interest. Just a few weeks ago, this same project was called unrealistic and unfeasible," Michael confessed. Benjamin smiled. "Michael, the difference is that now you're talking to people who understand the future of business lies in sustainability and social responsibility. Times have changed. The investor group approved the project and offered $150 million for its implementation. It was far less than the $700 million from the previous deal, but it would be used much more efficiently and beneficially." Michael could barely contain his emotion when he signed the partnership contract. His mother, Susan, was present at the ceremony, tears of pride in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered in her son's ear. The project began implementation 3 months later. Michael was named Director of Social Development, working directly with the Hope Village community to ensure the project met their real needs. One of the first people he sought out was Mrs. Robinson, the woman he had visited to thank for stopping the evictions. "Mrs. Robinson, I'd like to invite you to join the project's community board. We need people who know the neighborhood's history to guide us," Michael said during the visit. "My dear, I'd be happy to. But tell me one thing, why did you do all this? Why risk so much for people you didn't even know?" Mrs. Robinson asked. Michael thought for a moment before answering. "My grandmother lived here, Mrs. Robinson, and my father always said we're all responsible for each other. I couldn't live in peace knowing I had the power to help and chose to do nothing." Construction began 6 months later, unlike the original plan from Worldwide Ventures, which called for complete demolition of the area. The new project preserved historic buildings and incorporated existing families into the planning. Each family was given the option to stay in their renovated homes or move into one of the newly built residences. Local business owners were encouraged to expand with microloans and business training. Michael personally oversaw every stage of the project. Every morning, he walked through the streets of Hope Village, talking to residents, noting suggestions, and solving problems as they arose. It was during one of these walks that he ran into someone unexpected: David Miller, the former project director at Thompson and Associates. "Michael?" David said, clearly embarrassed to see him. "Hello, David. How are you?" Michael replied cordially. "I wanted to apologize for what happened at the company. I knew you were right about the deal, but I was too afraid to go against Richard," David admitted, lowering his head. Michael was surprised by David's honesty. "And what happened to you after the scandal?" "I was let go along with other employees when the company hit a crisis. Richard is being investigated for forming a cartel and money laundering. The company went bankrupt last month," David explained. "I'm really sorry about that, David. I never meant to hurt the honest employees of the company," Michael said sincerely. "Actually, you did us all a favor. Working in that environment was eating me up inside. Now I'm trying to start over, maybe even open my own residential design firm," David shared. Michael had an idea. "David, how about coming to work with us? We need someone experienced in project management, and I know you're capable and honest." David was moved by the offer. "You'd really give me a second chance after everything that happened?" "David, we all deserve a second chance when we're willing to do the right thing," Michael replied, extending his hand. David accepted the offer and became one of the most dedicated team members. His technical expertise, combined with his new purpose of working for a greater cause, made him a key part of the project's success. 2 years after construction began, Hope Village had transformed. The neighborhood kept its original character, but now had modern infrastructure, green spaces, a thriving local business scene, and a more united community. Michael created a vocational training program that taught over 300 local youth about sustainable construction, solar energy, and small business management. Many of them were hired by the project's partner companies. The success of Hope Village made national headlines. Journalists from across the country visited the neighborhood to learn about the sustainable urban development model. Michael was invited to speak at universities and international conferences. But the most rewarding moment for Michael came on a quiet Sunday afternoon as he walked through Hope Village's new central plaza. Families filled the space, children playing in the eco-friendly playground, elderly residents playing dominoes under fruit trees, young people studying in the reading area. "Michael," called a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Robinson, now 72, approaching with a radiant smile. "Mrs. Robinson, how are you?" Michael asked, giving her a gentle kiss on the forehead. "I'm seeing my neighborhood like I never dreamed possible. My grandson got a job at the solar energy company. My daughter opened a cafe in the food court, and I'm living to see it all," Mrs. Robinson said, tears of happiness in her eyes. "You were part of this, Mrs. Robinson. Your suggestions in the community council were crucial," Michael replied. "Michael, can I ask you something personal?" Mrs. Robinson said, taking his hand. "Of course, go ahead. Have you ever thought about starting a family? A good man like you should have children to keep doing good in the world," she said with a mischievous smile. Michael laughed. He had been so focused on work that personal matters had taken a back seat. But lately, he had noticed that Catherine, his project partner, wasn't just an excellent professional. There was something special about her that drew him beyond professional admiration. "Mrs. Robinson, maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to think about that," Michael replied, glancing discreetly at Catherine, who was across the plaza talking with a group of residents. 3 months later, Michael finally found the courage to ask Catherine out to dinner. To his surprise and delight, she accepted right away. "Catherine, I must confess I've wanted to have this conversation with you for a long time," said Michael during dinner at a cozy restaurant in Wicker Park. "Michael, to be honest, so have I. Working with you these past 2 years has shown me there are special people in this world," replied Catherine, blushing slightly. "Special how?" Michael asked with a smile. "People who put the common good above their own interests. People who have the courage to do the right thing even when it comes at a high cost. People like you," said Catherine, looking into Michael's eyes. They began dating discreetly, maintaining professionalism at work while building a personal relationship based on shared values and mutual admiration. The Hope Village project was nearing completion when Michael received a call that would change his life once again. On the other end of the line was Gregory Simmons, housing secretary of a small town outside Chicago. "Michael, we're familiar with your work in Hope Village and would like to propose a partnership to replicate the model in our town. We have 5 neighborhoods in need of revitalization," said Gregory. "Mr. Simmons, I'm honored by the invitation, but this would be a massive project. It would require a larger structure than we currently have," Michael replied. "That's exactly why we're proposing the creation of a foundation dedicated solely to this kind of work. You would be the executive director, with full autonomy to develop the methodology," Gregory explained. Michael discussed the proposal with Catherine and Benjamin Goldman. They were all excited about the possibility of expanding the impact of their work. "Michael, I think it's time we made our partnership official in our personal lives too," Catherine said during one of their planning meetings. Michael looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Michael Parker," Catherine said with a smile, pulling a small box from her pocket. Michael was completely speechless for a few seconds. Then he began laughing and crying at the same time. "Catherine Reynolds, you are completely crazy and completely perfect." "Of course I'll marry you," Michael said, kissing her passionately. They married 6 months later in a simple ceremony held in the central square of Hope Village. Mrs. Robinson was Catherine's matron of honor, and Susan, Michael's mother, was his. Benjamin Goldman served as Michael's best man. The foundation was officially established on their wedding day, named the Hope Institute for Sustainable Development. Michael and Catherine became the executive directors, working together to replicate the Hope Village model in other communities. Over the next 5 years, the Hope Institute revitalized 15 neighborhoods in 6 different cities, directly benefiting over 50,000 people. The model became an international benchmark for sustainable urban development. Michael never heard directly from Richard Thompson again, but learned through newspapers that he had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for collusion and money laundering. Thompson and Associates was completely dissolved, with its assets auctioned off to settle labor debts. In an ironic twist of fate, the building that once housed the former company's headquarters was purchased by the Hope Institute and transformed into a vocational training center for low-income youth. Michael and Catherine had 2 daughters, Emma, born 3 years after their wedding, and Olivia, who arrived 2 years later. Susan, now a doting grandmother, helped care for her granddaughters and often said her husband would have been proud of the legacy their son was building. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 10 years after the scandal that changed his life, Michael walked through Hope Village with his young daughters. 7-year-old Emma asked endless questions about everything she saw. "Daddy, did you build all this?" asked Emma, pointing to the sustainable housing complex. "No, sweetheart, I only helped. The people who built all this were the ones who live here, working together for a common goal," replied Michael. "And why did you help, Daddy?" asked 5-year-old Olivia. Michael stopped and knelt to his daughter's level. "Because everyone deserves a beautiful and safe place to live. And because when we help others, we become better people too. When I grow up, I want to help people like you do, Daddy," said Emma, with the determination typical of children. Michael smiled and hugged both girls. "If you want to help people, girls, you'll find millions of ways to do it. The important thing is to always remember we're all responsible for each other. At that moment, Michael remembered his father's words, which his mother had shared years ago. A person's worth isn't measured by how much money they accumulate, but by the good they do for others. Looking around Hope Village, seeing happy families, children playing safely, young people with bright futures, and elders living with dignity, Michael knew he'd made the right choices. He'd lost a well-paying job, faced threats and financial struggles, and been called a dreamer and idealist. But he'd gained something far more valuable, the certainty that his life had purpose and meaning. Catherine approached her husband and daughters, holding a report she'd just received. "Michael, the latest survey data is in. Crime rates in Hope Village have dropped 80% over the last 10 years. The number of young people attending college has increased by 400%, and 95% of residents say they're satisfied with their quality of life here," said Catherine, pride evident in her voice. "Those numbers matter, but they're not the most important ones," replied Michael. "Then what are?" asked Catherine. Michael pointed to a group of children playing in the square, elders chatting peacefully in the shade, and young students reading on the benches. "These are the most important numbers. Every smile, every dream realized, every family with hope for the future. That can't be measured in percentages, it's felt in the heart." That evening at home, Michael was helping Emma with a school essay about careers when she asked a question that made him pause. "Daddy, do you regret losing that job that paid so much money?" asked Emma. Michael stopped writing and looked at her. "Emma, do you want the truth?" "I do. Losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I hadn't, I might never have met your mother, you two might not have been born, and I certainly wouldn't have discovered my true purpose in life," replied Michael. "What's your purpose, Daddy?" "To help people live better lives, and to teach you that money matters, but it's not the most important thing in the world," he said, kissing his daughter's forehead. Emma smiled and went back to writing. On the page she wrote, "When I grow up, I want to be like my dad. He lost a lot of money so he wouldn't lose his peace of mind." Michael read the words over her shoulder and felt his eyes fill with tears. His daughters had learned the most important lesson he could teach, that integrity is worth more than any amount of money. Years later, as Emma studied social architecture in college and Olivia pursued business administration with a focus on social projects, Michael reflected on the journey he'd taken. It had all started with humiliation in a boardroom, a project torn up and thrown to the floor. But that humiliation had been the catalyst for discovering his true life's purpose. The young executive who was once scorned for trying to do the right thing had become a man respected for never abandoning his principles. The $700 million deal he walked away from without warning had saved not just hundreds of families, but also his own soul. On a Monday morning, 15 years after the life-changing incident, Michael was in his office at the Hope Institute when he received an unexpected visitor. "Excuse me, are you Michael Parker?" asked a young man around 25, dressed in a simple but well-kept suit. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Michael replied. "My name is Tyler Jackson. I just graduated with a degree in civil engineering, and I'd love to work at the Institute. I've read about your story and the work you do here. I want to be part of it," the young man said, his eyes shining with determination. Michael smiled, recognizing in the young man the same passion and idealism he himself had felt years ago. "Tyler, tell me, why do you want to work here? There are companies that pay far more than we can offer," Michael asked. "Mr. Parker, my grandfather always said life only has meaning when we work for something bigger than ourselves. I want to build houses that become homes, not just concrete structures. I want to work on projects that change people's lives for the better," Tyler answered. Michael stood and extended his hand to the young man. "Tyler, welcome to the Hope Institute. Let's change the world, one community at a time." As he shook his new employee's hand, Michael remembered himself 15 years earlier, young, idealistic, full of dreams, and ready to fight for what he believed in. The difference was that now he knew those dreams weren't impossible. They just required courage, determination, and above all, the willingness to do the right thing even when it came at a high cost. The circle was complete. The young executive who had been scorned for trying to make a difference now inspired a new generation of professionals who believed a better world was possible. And so, Michael Parker's story continued to unfold, not in million-dollar contracts, but in the smiles of children playing in safe parks, in the grateful tears of elders aging with dignity, and in the dreams of young people who believed the world could be transformed through small acts of courage and kindness. The lesson he had learned in that meeting room 15 years ago still held true. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters in life. The end. Now tell us what you thought of this story of resilience and courage. Do you agree that Michael made the right choice by walking away from the 700 million? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories like this one.